To the left, we have the Samsung S90D. To the right, we have the Samsung S95D. And we're going to be addressing what has changed after the brand new updates, particularly the 1200s. So we're going to dive right in by talking about what I've noticed. Gradations are darker now on the S95D. If you take a look at the colors here, you'll notice that there's just way more light color happening here on the S90D versus on the S95, where they're significantly darker. Now, the relevancy of this is it implies that the patch recently applied more contrast to the S95D. And this is kind of what I was seeing, which kind of prompted me to do this comparison. A good example of this will be this scene in Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. You can clearly see that there is a ton more contrast on the S95D versus the S90D. And this is where I was saying that it feels like after the patch, I'm just missing some extra sauce that the S90D used to have. Particularly the highlights on the windows here comparatively to what we have over there. And again, just the whole depth and dimension. It seems like Samsung really went the extra mile to make it clear that the S95D is the more flagship television by going in and nerfing the overall contrast comparatively to what we have on the S95D. Again, looking at the roof, you can see how dark that is now, how three-dimensional and contrast rich that is, versus again on the 90D where we just don't have that effect. Now, in terms of brightness, they are still in a very similar place, and you can kind of see that here in this example in Jujutsu Kaisen. And you can see that, again, the brightness level on the 90 is still good. So don't hear that they've nerfed the highlights in certain areas and think, oh, all my brightness is bad. No, brightness is still good, as you can clearly see comparatively against the 95. It's identical. I don't notice a real difference. Outside of, again, that contrast is where Samsung really isn't trying to take the loss comparatively to the 90D. I don't know if they've watched my videos and saw those comparisons of how it just had better contrast, but now we're seeing a reverse, as we can clearly see, way more three-dimensional versus that where it's a little bit more flat by comparison. And that's really what it seems like the patch did. It made the 90D more flat comparatively to their more flagship, kind of toning it down from the amount of contrast that it had before, at least from what I could tell so far. Another thing that I noticed it did is make the TV slower. So it takes a while to load and buffer internal apps like Netflix, YouTube, just pulling up the user interface a lot more than it did before the patch, I believe, again, trying to really distinguish the difference between high-end and the junior flagship. Now, this may be virtually impossible to see on YouTube, but also they've gone ahead and made buffering worse. So as you can clearly see, it just does a poor job of buffering and cleaning up things fast comparatively to the S95D now, where it's just always clean, always smooth. The processing seems to be a little bit weaker on the 90D in terms of what it's putting out. I, again, don't know why that is. It will probably take a while for it to clean up. Not that it can't, as I'll show you in the next example. Again, you can see it's clearly cleared up and cleaned up. But now, look at the depth perception, the amount of contrast on the 95D. The S90D is just not doing that anymore. And before, you guys remember, it used to be the total reverse. Again, look at how dark and rich all of this is, and the 90 is just falling behind. Again, I'm not making the 90 look worse. This is just what the patch did. So I got this feeling as I was playing, my PC and watching my normal stuff, like the 90D just doesn't have that same pop like it did before the update. What happened? And it really is just like they've lowered the contrast. And you're seeing it. It's very obvious in examples like this. Again, and this is where you have to, with every patch that comes out, truly investigate across multiple types of media to see what exactly they did. And I honestly found in my years of doing this, nothing works better than true anime content. Not animated content, anime. Because of the art style, it will expose any tampering with contrast or whatever that you see. As you can clearly see, there's just such a wide dynamic range that when you don't have it, it's very clear which one does and doesn't have it. Now, I think the thing that's really bugging me the most about this patch, and in general, is the 90D just does not have the same luminosity level. It's just way and far just dimmer now on full brightness screens like this in a lot of examples comparatively to what we have on the 95. Really, again, making that gap between their brightness levels known a lot better, where before the characteristic of the 90D was it had better highlights and it would outperform the 95D with maintaining highlight purity and being really luminous. Now it's like they've taken that away completely. They're like, yeah, right, we're not going to let you have that over the flagship model. That kind of overheats, throttles itself, and then gets dimmer as time goes on. So I think that's weird to see that change. And again, a good example of what I'm talking about with just the lack of luminosity, look at the buildings. Buildings give it away, which is why I say I love anime so much. Look at this. The lack of contrast in those buildings and overall luminosity comparatively to here. You have all the highlights in the hair, all the highlights in the coat here, or the scarf. You have all the detail you're supposed to have. Now, the relevancy and importance of this is before, the S90D would have these highlights blasting through very strong. So what it would make up for in its lack of overall brightness comparatively to the S95D, it would make up for in its highlights just being very luminous. It's not that it doesn't do that, but in more often examples than not, it doesn't do that. As you are clearly seeing here, it just is not getting the job done comparatively to what we have here. And again, that is very, very irritating. Now again, as I look at it, as the screen starts to come down and the ABL starts to kick in a little bit more, now it's starting to prioritize the highlights a little bit better. But when the full screen brightness is in effect, it just does not prioritize like the highlight mapping the way that it should, which is very weird. Again, one of the key examples where you're going to see this is in the building illuminations, the lights at the bottom. Again, look at how bright and luminous this is. And then we look at the 95, or rather the 90D, and it's just not doing it on the same level. Again, these little nuanced differences might not matter to a lot of people, but to like the purists of the purists out there like myself that want the most luminous of your small highlight detail and we pay attention to practical lighting and things like that, is going to bother you, I promise. But on both, moments can still be absolutely epic. And I mean epic. In this example, I don't really have a problem with the representation of either, albeit if I'm being honest, the extra highlight coming here over Vi's shoulder looks super good. And again, all the color in Jinx's eyes and in her hair as she's issuing her attack here really stands out more than what we have on the S90D, where it's more clear, but it doesn't have the luminosity. So I think the patch really just emphasizes giving the Samsung the edge in the luminosity department, where before the S90D had that. Now, one area that's a total slam dunk is HDR, because here we are in Arcane on Netflix, and you can clearly see the S90D just has the more three-dimensional picture. So again, those differences do exist in large in SDR, but in HDR, again, we do still see a beautiful rendition of color, contrast, and the like. And yeah, at this point in Arcane at like 2211, you're just in for a treat on both TVs, to be very honest with you. However, you can clearly see the S90D has the better color. The S95 is going to have the better highlights and contrast. And I'm not joking when I tell you the buffering on the S90D after the patch is a serious problem. Because in almost every example on Netflix that I could conjure, I can tell you right now, it looks horrible because it buffers so slowly comparatively to what we have on the S95D, where again, it's near instantaneous, like how the S90D used to be. Something that really, I can't lie, is really getting to me. And in this scene, if you wanted to see the difference between the color, again, it is going to be huge. I'm going to lower down my ISO or my camera sensitivity to light just so it's not so overpowering. And yeah, you can clearly see that difference in color. Again, the weird discoloration in his lip on the S90D is because there's serious issues around buffering, and that leads to chroma noise and a lot of crap that you just seriously don't want. And I think that's something that's really messed up about what happened with the patch. But yeah, again, you're not going to be getting the same level that you used to. Like in an example like this, the S90D to the left used to be really bright on small highlights like the fire inside of the smoke here. The little flame embers used to be so bright, and now they're not. Where again, the S95 is just a treat all around and way more three-dimensional, where you feel like you could reach out and grab the picture. And again, the buffering on the 90D is just killing the entire scene, not loading anywhere near as fast. So just to recap as to what your differences are, the S90D in terms of contrast and SDR is just going to be way more flat, less three-dimensional. Overall, there's a lot of dimming happening in terms of your peak highlights. Like, again, moments like these where you have these nice highlights that's going to see some significant dimming. However, the overall colors are better still on the S90D, as you can clearly see, just way more color than what we're getting over here. It is just what it is and how the cookie crumbles. Either way, both are competent TVs, but honestly speaking, you're not really going to escape what patches do from time to time. So what behaviors have you noticed between your S90D and maybe something else in your home like the S95? Let me know in the comments down below. Again, a bit of bad news, but it's not terrible because it's still a great TV, still a ton of clarity and detail and all that good stuff. But that being said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. And until the next video, I'll see you guys later.